Please step outside. A VIP table isn't the place for a suburban housewife like you. As soon as the mistress finished her sentence, my CEO husband turned his face away, silently allowing her to kick me out of a multi-million-dollar banquet. Welcome, dear listeners, to our story corner. We hope you find today's tale deeply satisfying. Early summer in Chicago often brings an uncomfortable, humid heat. But inside, the VIP banquet hall of a five-star hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, the crisp, cool air conditioning made it easy to forget the stifling atmosphere outside. I sat quietly at the corner of a table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, feeling the chill against my skin through my simple beige linen blouse. Around me, crystal glasses clinked. The lively laughter of the self-proclaimed upper crust blended with soft classical music playing from a state-of-the-art surround sound system. Tonight was a monumental night for KP development and architecture. It was the night my husband Kevin hosted a gala to welcome the executives of Oakwood Investment Group, the primary backers of a $500 million urban revitalization project in the historic downtown district. I looked at Kevin standing across the room, looking dashing in a crisp, bespoke suit, wearing the radiant, confident expression of a man in his 40s at the radiant peak of his career. But standing beside him wasn't me, the ride-or-die wife who had survived his poorest, darkest days, but Natalie. She was his young PR consultant, wearing a daring, plunging red evening gown. Natalie sparkled like a freshly polished diamond. Her smile was saccharine, her flirtatious eyes tracking Kevin's every move. Every so often, she would lean in to whisper something in his ear, making him throw his head back in laughter. I looked down at my hands. The thin calluses on my palms and index fingers were still there, scars from the years I spent walking miles through historic places, neighborhoods to measure lots, sketching blueprints, and pulling all-nighters, with Kevin to perfect his initial designs. Suddenly, the sharp click-clack of stiletto heels on the marble floor pulled me from my thoughts. Natalie was standing right in front of me, holding a pristine, white linen napkin. She looked me up and down, her eyes failing to hide her pity and disdain. With a swift, harsh motion, she snatched the napkin from my place, setting. Her voice was low but sharp enough that those sitting nearby could hear every word. Anna, today is the reception for the company's most important strategic partners. The room is filled with highly educated, prestigious people. Look at thing yourself. Does this outdated linen shirt and messy bun fit in here? This is a place for big business. Someone who only knows how to stay home, plant lilacs, and bake casseroles like you is only going to embarrass Kevin and cheapen the blanksless value of this event. You should know your place and leave this private room. Natalie's words were a bucket of ice water poured directly over my heart, making my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. I looked at the napkin she had, rudely snatched, then at her heavily contoured, arrogant face. My pride as a woman and a wife was deeply wounded, but I didn't raise my voice, nor did I cry. I simply looked up, met her gaze, and tried to keep my voice from trembling. Natalie, I am Kevin's legal wife and the co-founder of KP Development from the Barry Eck days when this company couldn't even afford a decent office space. My presence here is both my right and my duty. I don't need a newcomer like you to lecture me. Natalie let out a cold, mocking scoff. The sound caught the attention of several junior directors standing nearby. They immediately fell silent, pretending to look away or staring intensely at their phones. Not a single person dared to speak up for me. They all knew exactly how much weight Natalie's words carried. With the CEO, my husband, I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the AC, but from the coldness of human nature. It was the sheer ingratitude of the very people I had personally trained and helped when they first entered the industry. I searched for Kevin, hoping he would see this and rush to my side. But when our eyes met, all I saw in his was annoyance, evasion, and a flicker of embarrassment. He didn't step forward to defend the honor of the wife who had shared his every hardship. He just stood there, swirling his red wine, slightly furrowing his brow as if I were the one causing a scene and ruining his perfect night. The chill from Lake Michigan seemed to seep directly into the room, penetrating my very cells, making me realize that the home I had cherished for so long was nothing but a sandcastle, ready to be washed away by the tide. The banquet hall suddenly fell dead silent. The lively chatter was extinguished by the suffocating tension enveloping my table. I could clearly see the expressions on the junior staff's faces. Some looked sympathetic, some gloated, but most displayed the cold apathy of people who only side with the powerful. Kevin finally walked over. His steps were slow but heavy. The sound of his leather shoes hitting the floor felt alien and agonizing. I looked up at the man I had once loved more than myself. The man I had stayed up with all night, making him chicken noodle soup when he was sick. The man who had held my hand in the pouring Chicago rain, swearing he would never betray me. Kevin stood in front of me, right next to Natalie, creating an invisible but impenetrable wall separating me from their world. He wouldn't look me in the eye. His gaze shifted to the floral centerpiece as he spoke in a low, cold, commanding tone. "Anna, don't make a scene here. Tonight is crucial for KP's future, and I don't want any mistakes. The way you're dressed really isn't appropriate for entertaining VIPs. Just call an Uber and head home first. Whatever is bothering you, I'll explain it tonight. Just stop making a fuss." His words were a fatal stab to my heart. I was making a fuss? I had been sitting this silently in a corner, swallowing everyone's coldness, watching my husband flirt with another woman, yet he accused me of making a scene. I looked deep into Kevin's eyes, desperately searching for a shred of empathy, a glimmer of our past. But all I received was selfishness, cowardice, and utter ruthlessness. He chose to stand with his mistress. He chose to protect his superficial, flashy image over the wife who had spent her youth building the launchpad for his success. I remembered our early years, shivering in a drafty walk-up apartment on the Praise South Side. During the brutal winters, we barely had enough blankets. Back then, Kevin was just a broke architect with pipe dreams. I was the one who used a grandmother's trust fund and tapped into my maternal family's connections to secure his very first design contracts. I had skipped meals and skimped on clothes so he could afford a high-end computer for his renders. I had swallowed my pride to beg industry veterans to mentor him. And now, having acquired a little wealth and status, he viewed my humility as an embarrassment, my silent endurance as a mandatory duty. Standing beside him, Natalie flashed a triumphant, haughty smile. She gently stroked the sleeve of his suit jacket, acting as if she were already the lady of the house. She chimed in, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "That's right, Anna. Kevin is right. You should just go home and rest. I can handle everything here. A good wife should prioritize her husband's career, right? Kevin?" Kevin said nothing. His silence was an endorsement of his mistress's insolence. In that moment, his silence was the clearest answer to all the doubts I'd harbored over the past 3 months. He wasn't distant because of work or project stress. He had simply changed. He had chosen Natalie's flashy, expensive orchids over the humble, sweet-smelling white lilacs I grew on our balcony. I took a deep breath, fighting back tears of weakness. I knew crying in front of these people would only give them satisfaction. I stood up, smoothed out my linen blouse, and looked at Kevin one last time with dead, cold eyes. There was no warmth left. I stepped away from the table, but I didn't head for the exit as Kevin and Natalie expected. I stopped in the wide-open space in the center of the hall, right on the red carpet leading to the head table. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite swung open. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted to one of breathless reverence. The most powerful man of the night, the chairman of Oakwood Investment Group, walked in alongside a delegation of assistants and corporate lawyers. The entire KP executive board bowed their heads in respect. Kevin instantly beamed, nervously adjusting his collar, and rushed forward to greet him with a sycophantic eagerness I had never seen before. But the chairman, I didn't walk toward Kevin. He stopped right in front of me. It was Thomas, my older half-brother, the man who, for years, had quietly watched over and protected me from afar. I looked at him, my eyes blurring, slightly, but I quickly regained my composure. I called out to him, my voice soft, but clear, echoing through the dead silent room. "Thomas, are we still signing this contract?" My question was a lightning bolt striking the room. Kevin froze. The smile stiffened on his face, and the wine glass in his hand trembled so violently that dark red wine sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth like splatters of blood. Natalie's eyes widened, her heavily contoured face draining of color, completely failing to comprehend what was happening. The hall plunged into a terrifying silence. You could hear Kevin's ragged breathing and Thomas's steady footsteps as he stepped closer to me. Thomas looked at me, his eyes full of the heartache and fierce protective love of an older brother for his only sister. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, his voice warm but carrying the crushing authority of a billionaire who controlled the fate of thousands of businesses. "Anna, why are you standing all the way over here? Who made you suffer like this?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Kevin, who was rooted to the spot, cold sweat beating on his forehead. The shocking truth was suddenly laid bare before him, like a cruel joke of fate. Kevin had always believed I was just a poor, fatherless girl who relied on her grandmother's charity. He never knew that my mother's side of the family were the founders of the prestigious Oakwood Group. I had chosen to hide my background, not to deceive him, but because I wanted a pure, unconditional love. I wanted us to build an empire together from scratch. But life is cruel. Once he got a taste of money, he used my grounded, humble nature as an excuse to justify his betrayal. Thomas turned to Kevin. The warmth in his eyes completely vanished, replaced by a terrifying, razor-sharp severity. He walked over to the head table, completely, ignoring Kevin's extended hand, and didn't even glance at Natalie, who was cowering behind Kevin's back. Thomas sat down, dropping a thick leather binder onto the table. The dull thud made the entire KP board flinch. Thomas spoke, his voice ringing like steel in the massive room. "Kevin, I have heard a lot about your self-made success, about how you built KP development with your bare hands. But witnessing this spectacle today, I finally understand where your morals and your image truly lie. You tried to kick your wife out of this banquet because you felt her simple clothes embarrassed you. Do you even realize that without her family's financial backing, and without the brilliant blueprints she drafted in secret for you over the last 6 years, your company wouldn't even exist for you to stand here and brag?" The luxurious banquet hall felt like a silent courtroom, where every flashy mask was ripped off under the harsh light of truth. Thomas's executive assistant stepped forward, opened a premium leather briefcase, and placed a stack of genealogical records and legal documents right in front of Kevin. The assistant's voice was monotone but devastating, striking like a hammer against my husband's delusional ego. "Allow me to clarify this for Mr. Kevin and everyone present. Anna's grandmother, Eleanor Vance, was the philanthropist who donated the prime real estate for the city's Urban Planning Commission headquarters. She was a titan of Chicago's architectural heritage. Chairman Thomas and Anna are half-siblings. When their mother remarried and moved to New York, Anna chose to stay in Chicago, with her grandmother's side of the family to care for her in her final years. Anna's family background isn't some small suburban business, as she humbly let you believe. It is a legacy deeply rooted in both the academic and financial bedrock of this city." With every word, Kevin's face turned a deeper shade of gray. His knees seemed to give out, forcing him to grip the edge of the banquet table just to stay standing. He looked at me, his eyes swirling with sheer terror, regret, and absolute panic. He remembered the early days of our relationship, when he took me to his dilapidated childhood home in the rural Midwest. I hadn't complained once. Instead, I rolled up my sleeves, cleaned the house, and cooked a massive meal for his family. Back then, Kevin had hugged me, swearing on his life that he would spend his days making it up to me, promising me the best life possible. He had sworn to love my pure, humble soul and my quiet brilliance. Yet, when he stumbled into wealth, he weaponized those exact virtues to mock and despise me. I stood there looking at the man who used to be my whole world. There was no pain left, only an endless, freezing emptiness. I wondered how a person could change so quickly. Does money and fame really have the omnipotent power to turn a decent, hardworking man into a cowardly, despicable snake willing to trample the woman who built him? I remembered the late nights when Kevin came home, blackout drunk from entertaining clients. I would stay awake wiping his face, brewing him hangover remedies, listening to him ramble about work pressure. I had trusted him implicitly. I never checked his phone or questioned his long business trips. I believed 6 years of shared struggle were enough to protect us from life's temptations. Natalie, meanwhile, had lost all her arrogance. She was trembling, her head bowed, too terrified to look at anyone. The sparkling $50,000 diamond Cartier bracelet on her wrist, bought with Kevin's secondary credit card, now looked incredibly ironic and pathetic. She used to boast to everyone at the office about her refined, old-money taste, claiming she was more fit to stand beside the CEO than his country bumpkin wife. But now, in the presence of actual elite society, her high-class facade was exposed as a cheap joke, a tacky imitation. Thomas looked at his sister, then back at Kevin, his voice delivering the final judgment. KP Development was considered for Oakwood's $500 million project, not because of your outstanding abilities, Kevin, but because I trusted my sister's vision and integrity. She is the one who poured her heart into drafting the initial humanitarian concepts for this revitalization. But today, I see you are no longer worthy of that trust. A man who betrays his wife, who betrays the person who lifted him out of poverty, lacks the basic morality required to understand and preserve the cultural heritage of a historic epicenter district. The tension in the room dipped slightly as I let out a soft sigh. My mind drifted back to 3 months ago, to the luxury townhouse we had just moved into, in the upscale suburbs. It was massive and modern, but to me, it never felt as warm as our old cramped apartment. Seeking a bit of peace, I had personally renovated the third-floor balcony, planting pots of humble white lilacs, my late grandmother's favorite flower. Every evening, when the sweet scent drifted into my home office, my soul felt soothed, the exhaustion of work fading away. But one day, after returning from a site survey downtown, I was horrified to find my lilacs completely uprooted. Not a single trace remained. In their place were rows of incredibly expensive, exotic Phalaenopsis orchids, vibrant, rigid, lacking any real fragrance, arranged in a sterile, artificial manner. I ran downstairs to ask the housekeeper, who awkwardly pointed upstairs. At that moment, Natalie walked down the staircase, a thin layer of potting soil still on her hands. She looked at me, smiling as casually as if she owned the place. "Oh, Anna, you're home? I saw your lilacs. They looked so suburban and cheap, and they attract bugs, so I had the landscapers clear them out. I bought these orchids for a few $1,000s. Kevin loves luxury and class. A CEO's balcony needs exotic orchids to match his status. Don't you think I did a great job?" I stood frozen, my chest heaving with rage. I turned to Kevin, who had just walked through the front door. I hoped he would stand up for me, tell Natalie what those lilacs meant to me. But Kevin just glanced over and clicked his tongue. "Natalie's right, Anna. This is a CEO's house now. You need to change your mindset. Those cheap bushes don't fit the aesthetic of this property. Let Natalie handle the styling. She makes it look expensive." Kevin's silence and indulgence of Natalie didn't stop at my balcony. It extended to his family in the Midwest. On his mother's birthday, we drove down to celebrate. I woke up at 4 a.m., went to the local market, and spent hours cooking a classic homemade pot roast with mashed potatoes and green bean. Casserole, simple comfort food, but it was his mother's absolute favorite. I wanted to create a warm, intimate family atmosphere away from the chaotic city. But just as I set the table, Natalie unexpectedly pulled up in Kevin's luxury SUV. She strutted into the house looking glamorous, holding a velvet jewelry box. In front of all his rural relatives, she opened the box and presented Kevin's mother with a dazzling diamond tennis bracelet, her voice dripping like, "Honey, Mrs. Miller, for your birthday, I brought a little something for you. I had a jeweler friend source these diamonds specifically from Antwerp. Diamonds have a wonderful energy, so good for lifting the spirit. I hope you stay youthful and healthy so you can always be the strong foundation for Kevin as his career skyrockets." Kevin's mother looked at the sparkling diamonds, her eyes lighting up. She immediately slipped it onto her wrist, then turned to look at me with utter disgust. She pointed at the hearty meal I had spent all morning cooking, her shrill voice echoing for everyone to hear. "Look at this. Now this is a sophisticated, educated city girl. When you bring a piloscent gift, it needs to be valuable and classy to match my son's status. Not like some people who only know how to make peasant food, completely embarrassing my son. Let me tell you something, Anna. My boy is a golden boy now. You'd better step up your game, or you're going to drag him down. I looked at my mother-in-law. This was the woman to whom I had faithfully sent money for medical bills and groceries every single month, back when Kevin was broke. I looked at Kevin. He sat there, happily accepting the relatives' praises for Natalie and his mother. He offered no explanation that the $50,000 for that diamond bracelet was actually swiped from a secondary credit card linked to our O%T joint account, the very money I had earned by staying up nights finishing freelance drafting gigs. I stayed silent. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I quietly pulled a worn leather notebook from my purse and wrote down the date, the event, and every heartless, ungrateful word they said. That notebook was the silent witness to my endurance. And it would be the damning indictment against them when Judgment Day arrived. Back in the present, the crystal chandelier above the banquet hall cast a pale, cold light directly onto the thick file Thomas had thrown onto the table. The sound hadn't been loud, but in the suffocating silence, it carried the weight of a life sentence. I looked at that file. Bound in dark blue leather, it contained the results of countless sleepless nights and the sweat I and my former colleagues had poured onto the cobblestone streets of the historic district. But now, manipulated by Kevin's greed and Natalie's shallow guidance, it had been mutated into a soulless monster, ready to crush the lives of hundreds of innocent people. Thomas slowly opened the file, his fingers tapping against the detailed zoning maps. His deep, chilling voice echoed again. Kevin, when Oakwood Group awarded this revitalization contract to KP, we weren't just looking for a firm to build shiny high-rises. We wanted someone with a soul, someone who respected every ifly brace, brick and historical facade of this city. The original draft, designed by Anna and vetted by industry veterans, was a deeply humanitarian project. It preserved spaces for low-income residents, for local mom-and-pop shops, for the historic watchmakers and old diners. Yet, look at what you've turned it into. Thomas nodded to his assistant. Instantly, a comparative map was projected onto the wall. Seeing those overlapping red and blue lines, a wave of bitter sorrow washed over me. The public spaces, the children's playgrounds, and the preservation zones for legacy businesses that I had meticulously mapped out down to the square foot were completely erased. In their place, Kevin had maximized commercial zoning, wiping out all rent assistance funds for small businesses, making way for a massive 5-story luxury mega mall and penthouses sold at extortionate prices. Kevin stammered, his face bloodless. His hands shook as he desperately tried to flip through his explanatory notes. Thomas. Mr. Chairman, please let me explain. Times have changed. Real estate is too valuable. If we stick to this outdated, bleeding heart mentality, how can we maximize ROI? A $500 million project needs a fast return. Putting low-income vendors in this prime location ruins the aesthetic and devalues the land. I did this for the financial growth of both our companies. Please understand it from a business perspective. Thomas let out a dry, contemptuous laugh. He stood up and slowly walked toward the projection. Maximize ROI. Kevin, you call yourself a chief architect, an ROI educated man, but your brain only sees dead numbers on paper. Do you even know where the soul of this city lies? It lies in the street musicians, in the humble family diners, in the lilacs blooming in old window boxes, not in the lifeless glass walls of a mega mall popping up on every corner. Anna spent 3 months walking every alley, knocking on the doors of 60 low-income families to hear their concerns, just to find a compromise between preservation and development. And you? You sat in an air-conditioned office, listened to the sweet nothings of an amateur, and erased your wife's hard work to turn a humanitarian project into a corrupt cash grab. I watched Kevin shrink under the weight of the truth. The man who was once my rock now looked incredibly small and pathetic. He didn't understand or refused. To that, the lasting value of architecture isn't about how much cash it prints in the first few years, but how it lives in the hearts of the people for generations. Selfishness and greed had blinded him, making him forget the pursuit ethical lessons we swore by in architecture school. He forgot that the humanitarian aspect of the design was the only reason KP beat out dozens of heavyweights to catch Oakwood's eye. Natalie, pressed behind Kevin, was trembling, unable to speak. Her plunging red dress now looked grotesque and wildly out of place in a room thick with legal and moral reckoning. She kept her head down, avoiding Thomas's razor-sharp glare, but the truth glaring on the projector screen was something no excuse could hide. The gutted, soulless blueprint was the ultimate proof of their moral anti-exed decay. The projector clicked again, and the atmosphere in the VIP room froze entirely, as an even worse truth was unveiled. Thomas gestured to his assistant, and screenshots from a public Instagram account appeared on the big screen. Alongside them were red-stamped financial contracts. These documents didn't just relate to design changes. They exposed a blatant embezzlement scheme, executed by an incredibly greedy but shallow mind. Thomas stared directly at Natalie, his eyes like winter ice. "Miss Natalie, you call yourself a top-tier PR consultant, a breath of fresh air for KP, but it seems you care far more about lining your own pockets than building a brand. Explain to me who owns this shell company, Windy City Elite PR? Why did a phantom company, established 2 months ago with 0 actual employees, get a Prosence S&T2, ADA John ATS, $1.5 million exclusive PR contract for this mega project? The actual PR expenses were less than $100,000. The remaining $1.4 million was wired directly into your clum's personal offshore account the minute the contract was signed." I stared in shock at the numbers on the screen. My heart ached, remembering how I had pinched pennies, debating every dollar spent on office supplies, while behind my back, Kevin was casually approving massive payouts to his mistress. Kevin snapped his head toward Natalie, his eyes bulging with shock and fury. It seemed even he didn't know about this financial trap. Or perhaps he had been so intoxicated by her flattery that he blindly signed stacks of documents without a second thought. But Natalie's stupidity didn't stop at embezzling company funds. Thomas switched to the next slide, showing selfies Natalie had taken inside Kevin's office. In the photos, she was smiling brightly, holding a designer latte. But right behind her, clearly visible on the desk, were the highly classified master blueprints of the project, complete with the City Planning Commission's red confidential stamp. She had posted this publicly on Instagram with the arrogant caption, "About to conquer a $500M project with my baby. Elite living coming soon too. Downtown, number girl boss, number billionaire lifestyle." Thomas slammed his hand on the table. The explosive sound made Natalie jump, nearly collapsing to the floor. "Do you know what this is?" he roared. "This is a severe violation of corporate espionage laws. You leaked classified municipal documents before the project was even officially approved. Your vanity and desperation to show off your future CEO wife status to the internet just put Oakwood Group and KP Development in catastrophic legal jeopardy. To brag to your followers, you handed our competitors illegal evidence on a silver platter, destroying the reputation my sister spent 6 years building." Kevin completely broke down. He looked at Natalie with pure, unadulterated hatred and disgust. The woman he had praised as brilliant and savvy, the one who supposedly elevated him from his suburban wife, was revealed to be a greedy idiot, a ticking time bomb about to obliterate his entire career. Natalie sobbed silently, her expensive makeup running down her face in messy streaks. She tried to grab Kevin's arm, but he violently shoved her away like a piece of filthy trash. I stood quietly watching this tragedy unfold. I felt no gleeful vindication, only a profound, bottomless sadness for human nature. Deceit and betrayal always carry the seeds of self-destruction. Kevin and Natalie had dug their own graves, with their greed and hubris. Those flashy, artificial orchids were just parasites without deep roots. The moment the winds of truth blew, they withered, instantly. While Kevin and Natalie were drowning in panic, I quietly unzipped my simple, canvas tote bag and pulled out my worn brown leather notebook. The corners were frayed from time, the pages yellowed. This had been my lifeline for 6 years. It held not just technical specs and rough sketches, but a meticulous record of the silent, uncredited sacrifices I made for KP development. I took a few steps forward and placed the notebook firmly on the banquet table, right next to Thomas's legal files. I looked straight at Kevin, who was shaking uncontrollably. When I spoke, there was no anger, no resentment, just the calm, resonant peace of someone who had finally dropped a massive burden. "Kevin, you always boasted to your staff, your partners, and your mother that You were a self-made man, a genius architect who built KP from nothing without anyone's help. You called me an outdated housewife who only knew how to garden and cook, an embarrassment at your high society dinners. Well, today, in front of the chairman and your entire executive board, allow me to read a few pages from this notebook so we can all see whose blood and bones built your plastid, self-made empire. I opened to the first page. My neat handwriting stood out under the lights. The 12th of April, 2018. Kevin came home from entertaining clients with a bleeding science tumor D, stomach ulcer. I stayed awake all night at Northwestern Memorial Hospital taking care of him, draining my grandmother's trust fund allowance to pay the medical bills. The next day, so he wouldn't stress, I stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing his blueprints for the Civic Center, then forged his signature so he could submit it, get paid, and make payroll. I turned the page. My voice remained steady and clear, echoing in the silent room. The 18th of May, 2019. To get approval from the director of zoning, a notoriously strict man suffering from severe diabetes. I spent a week researching herbal remedies and drove out of state to buy a rare small batch artisan tea. I brought that humble gift, along with the blueprints I personally drew, to meet him. I used my architectural knowledge and sincerity to convince him to give KP a chance. That same day, Kevin was playing golf with other developers. When the contract was approved, Kevin told everyone it was his elite networking skills. I looked at Kevin. Beads of sweat were rolling down his pale face. Every page I turned was a hammer smashing the fraudulent ego he had built. In that notebook, I had documented the preferences, habits, and medical conditions of every VIP client Kevin interacted with. I was the one who prepared the thoughtful gifts and remedies he used to network. I was the one pulling all-nighters fixing the critical errors in his designs before bidding. KP's success today was mortared with the sweat, tears, and silent sacrifices of the wife he deemed useless. I closed the notebook. The leather slapped against the wood table with a crisp snap. I gave Kevin one last, utterly cold look. Kevin, you can lie to the world, but you can't lie to yourself or to these pages. I dressed simply not because I didn't know how to spend money, but because I poured every single dollar back into your company, into your future. But you confused my patience with stupidity. You treated my silent endurance as a given right, and you used the very launchpad I sacrificed my youth to build to trample on my dignity. The room was deathly quiet. No one dared to cough or even make eye contact. My words were spoken softly, but they carried the devastating power of truth, stripping away the betrayal and exposing Kevin as a cheap fraud in front of Chicago's true elite. The power dynamic in the room had entirely flipped. From sitting at the peak of arrogance, ready to expel his wife to save face, Kevin plummeted into an abyss of humiliation and powerlessness. Looking at Natalie's embezzlement file on the screen and my worn notebook on the table, he realized his title of CEO was about to pop like a soap bubble. In his sheer panic, the despicable, cowardly nature of a small man revealed itself. Losing all his polished composure, his face twisted in fear and rage, he glared at Natalie, his eyes bloodshot. Suddenly, he raised his hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap across her face. Smack! The sharp sound made several women in the back flinch. The force of the blow sent Natalie crashing into the edge of the table. The $50,000 diamond bracelet hit the marble floor, the clasp breaking, sending diamonds scattering across the ground, sparkling but incredibly cold. Kevin pointed at Natalie, his voice hoarse and dripping with blame. You bitch! You've been lying to me this whole time. You set up a shell company to steal from me, and you were stupid enough to post classified documents online and destroy me. It's you. You gold-digging whore. You manipulated me, blinded me, and made me treat my wife like garbage. He dropped to his knees, turning to me. Anna, please, I was wrong. It was this bitch's fault. She seduced me. She trapped me. In my heart, it's always been you. And our family. I took a step back, dodging his pathetic, groveling hands, feeling a surge of absolute disgust. The man I had loved and respected more than my own life was a coward who would violently assault the woman he had just been pampering the clothes the moment his own interests were threatened. His betrayal of me was terrifying, but his cruelty toward his mistress in his moment of ruin was even more chilling. It proved he had no love in his heart. Not for me, not for Natalie. The only things he loved were his status, his money, and his own selfish ego. Natalie clutched her swelling red cheek, blood trickling from her lip. She glared at Kevin with a look of pure, venomous hatred. Her triumphant pride from earlier was reduced to rubble. She let out a manic, bitter laugh that rang through the hall. She stood up abruptly, pointing right back at him, screaming for everyone to hear. "You blame me? Kevin, you told me your wife was a suburban loser with no connections. You said she was weak, easy to bully, and could be pacified with a few sweet words. You told me to rip up her lilacs. You handed me your credit card and told me to buy a $50,000 diamond bracelet to bribe your mother so she'd cover for us. You told me that as soon as you signed this $500 million deal with Oakwood, you were going to force her into a divorce, leave her with nothing, and make me your official wife? And now that you're going bankrupt, you bite me? You cowardly piece of trash." Natalie's screams were a second bucket of ice water, ripping the lid off the Brado. Dark, premeditated scheme Kevin had been plotting behind my back for months. I stood there, feeling my heart harden into steel. There was no pain left, only an ache. Immense, liberating relief knowing that walking away from this man was the best decision of my life. Kevin stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, unable to form a single word of defense. His betrayal had been exposed in the most humiliating way possible by his own partner in crime. You reap what you sow. The man who betrayed his ride-or-die wife was ultimately betrayed by the very woman he plotted with. The suffocating tension in the room shifted slightly when the heavy oak doors opened one final time. It wasn't a young executive or a slick lawyer who walked in, but a man in his 70s with snow-white hair. He walked slowly but steadily, assisted by a young staff member. It was Mr. Arthur Vance, the former chief architectural advisor for KP Development. He had dedicated 40 years to the city's urban planning, only to be insulted by Natalie as an outdated old fool, holding the company back, before Kevin heartlessly fired him 6 months ago. Mr. Arthur's appearance caused the junior directors to immediately stand and bow, their heads in respect. Even Kevin stammered, his eyes wide. Mr. Arthur? Why are you here?" Mr. Arthur didn't look at Kevin. He walked slowly to me, placing a weathered, calloused, but incredibly warm hand on my shoulder. His eyes were full of kindness and understanding. "Anna, you've endured too much. I came here today to demand justice for you, and to fulfill the promise I made to your late grandmother to protect the humanitarian soul of Chicago's architecture." Mr. Arthur turned to Thomas and the legal delegates. He raised a cup of hot tea. From the table, his deep voice carrying immense spiritual weight. "Gentlemen, I stand here today as the man who was with KP from its inception, and the one who oversaw the first 17 drafts of this mega project. I swear on my professional license and my conscience that the core concepts, the preservation of cultural spaces, the economic support for local vendors, were entirely the intellectual sauce, property, and hard work of Anna. Kevin was just the name on the letterhead. He lacks the empathy and the soul to touch a project like this." He finally looked at Kevin. There was no anger in the old mentor's eyes, only a profound, endless disappointment, a master looking at a fallen student. "Kevin, when you first entered this industry, I praised your talent. But do you know why? You are in this humiliating position today because you ran too fast. You chased the flash of money and forgot why you started. You thought money and status gave you the right to look down on humility, to look down on the wife who kept you from freezing in the winter, to look down on the advice of your elders. You fired me because I was outdated. You tried to throw your wife out because she was suburban. But you never realized that her humility and my traditional values were the only things keeping your soul from rotting and your company from collapsing under the temptations of the world." Kevin hung his head, his shoulders shaking violently. Mr. Arthur's words were a prophecy piercing his soul, exposing the absolute moral bankruptcy of a man who thought he was rich, but was utterly destitute in character. The silence was broken only by the heavy sigh of the old mentor and Natalie's "You stay ass," muffled sobbing in the corner. The verdict of both conscience and the law had been delivered. The price for betrayal was the total collapse of a sandcastle, built on lies. Thomas stood up, leaning his strong hands against the mahogany table. He looked at Kevin, then at Natalie, who was curled on the floor, her expensive hair hiding her bruised face. Thomas's voice held the weight of a supreme judge. Kevin, the law has loopholes, but professional ethics and conscience offer no leniency. Oakwood Investment Group officially revokes KP Development's bidding status for the $500 million revitalization project. Not only because of severe corporate espionage committed by your consultant, but because we refuse to hand the soul of this city over to a man who butchered a humanitarian design for dirty money. A man who betrayed the wife who starved with him. The TAG's termination papers and breach of confidentiality lawsuits will be on your desk at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Get your lawyers ready. Kevin completely collapsed. He fell to his knees, clasping his hands together, crawling toward me like a condemned prisoner begging for a pardon. His voice was hoarse and distorted with terror. Anna, please. I was wrong. I was blind. Say something to Thomas. If we lose this project, KP will go bankrupt. 6 years of Don's, our hard work down the drain. Can you really watch our baby die like this? I looked down at him. Not a ripple of anger remained, just the ultimate coldness of disappointment. I took a step back, avoiding his grasping hands, and unzipped my canvas tote bag one more time. I pulled out a fresh, teal-colored portfolio and placed it gently on the table. On the cover, the words Integrity Design Collective, Architectural Proposal were printed boldly, accompanied by the official red approval stamp of the City Planning Commission, dated exactly 1 month ago. I looked at Kevin, my voice frighteningly calm. You're right, Kevin. KP was the child I sacrificed my youth to build. But you were wrong to think I would let you drag me down into the mud with you. 6 months ago, when I found the texts between you and Natalie, when I saw you let her rip up my lilacs, I knew this day would come. I didn't cry or cause a scene, because my worth is not determined by the pity of a traitor. Mr. Arthur and I, along with 12 of your former architects, the honest ones you fired for refusing to corrupt the blueprints, formed the Integrity Design Collective. We work with clear heads and humanitarian hearts, not with backstabbing schemes. Mr. Arthur smiled proudly. Mr. Chairman, the original 17 drafts, including the vendor subsidy models and historic preservation plans, were copyrighted under Integrity Design Collective 3 months ago, before Kevin deleted them for his mega mall. We have the legal standing and the expertise to take over the core consulting for this project, without any greedy middlemen. Thomas looked at the portfolio, his eyes lighting up. He pulled out his luxury fountain pen and, right in front of the paralyzed KP executive board, decisively signed the Memorandum of Understanding between Oakwood Group and Integrity Design Collective. The crisp scratch of the pen on paper was a beautiful sound. It marked a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was no longer the silent shadow behind a deceitful man, but the captain of my own ship, sailing toward light and integrity. Just 3 days after that fateful night at the hotel, a massive earthquake shook Chicago's real estate sector. The news that Oakwood had blacklisted KP and handed the $500 million project to Integrity Design Collective spread like wildfire. In cafes across the city, people weren't just talking about a corporate shakeup. They were whispering the legend of the ride, or die wife, who quietly dethroned her cheating husband with sheer brilliance and iron will. Kevin's self-made CEO title became the biggest joke of the year. I stood on the balcony of my new office in a historic brownstone, looking down at the bustling streets. I felt as light as if chains had been removed from my slank body. In my 40s, I realized the best revenge isn't hatred. It's living a brilliant, happy, and successful life. While Integrity Collective was busy welcoming new partners, the printers running, day and night, a completely different scene was unfolding in the upscale suburbs. Natalie's reputation was obliterated. After the embezzlement and leaked, classified documents hit the news, no firm in the city would touch her. She was dropped by her fashion sponsors. Her high society friends vanished overnight, treating her like a plague. Her tearful apologies on Instagram were met with relentless public mockery. The flashy orchids she had so carefully cultivated were shredded by the storm of truth. As for Kevin, his downfall was swift and brutal. Losing the Oakwood contract triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Banks pulled his credit lines, demanding immediate repayment. Subcontractors swarmed KP headquarters, demanding their money. Buyers for his other luxury condo projects pulled out, demanding refunds due to the espionage scandal. My old housekeeper told me that the massive suburban house now looked like a haunted mansion. Kevin locked himself in his dark office, drinking heavy liquor. To escape reality, the sound of smashing glass echoed late into the night. After being slapped and kicked out, Natalie had packed up all her designer bags and jewelry and fled to the West Coast, leaving Kevin with the massive tax debt from her shell company. On that third-floor balcony, where Natalie had arrogantly ripped up my lilacs, the scene was desolate. The expensive orchids, unwatered and neglected, had withered under the brutal summer sun. The once proud purple petals were now dried, gray, and scattered across the dusty floor, a perfect mirror to the tragic end of those who build their lives on deceit and cruelty. Late afternoon sunlight poured like honey into the new offices of Integrity Design Collective. The air always smelled of the fresh, clean scent of the white lilacs I had planted in terracotta pots by the windows. I was reviewing a zoning clause when the heavy wooden door was pushed open. A middle-aged woman rushed in, looking frantic. Her face was lined with stress, her eyes swollen from days of crying. It was Kevin's mother, the woman who had called me a peasant and an embarrassment. Seeing me, she lunged forward, her hands covered in tacky gold rings trembling. As she grabbed mine, her voice was choked with pathetic begging. "Anna, I'm begging you. Save Kevin, save our family. He's about to be indicted. The banks are foreclosing on the house. You've always been so sweet and dutiful. You took such good care of me. Just say a word to your brother Thomas. Tell him to give the project back. I swear to you, I'll kick that Natalie girl out. Myself. You can come back and be the lady of the house, the CEO's wife. Please, Anna." I gently but firmly pulled my hands away, gesturing for her to sit in the rattan chair opposite me, and poured her a glass of warm water. My total calm was a mirror reflecting the pathetic hypocrisy of a woman who measured human worth entirely by money. "Drink some water, Mrs. Miller," I said, my voice cool and unwavering. "Kevin and I have already filed for divorce. The court is processing it, so please have some self-respect and stop calling me your daughter." It feels very forced. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a receipt with the red stamp of a high-end jeweler on Michigan Avenue. I placed it next to her water glass. "Look closely at this receipt. This is for the $50,000 diamond bracelet Natalie gave you for your birthday. That money didn't come from her, and it didn't come from Kevin. It was swiped from a secondary card linked to my account money I earned working 3 straight nights on freelance blueprints. She used my money to buy your affection. And you used that bracelet as an excuse to cover for your son's affair while calling me a useless peasant." Kevin's mother turned ashen. She looked at the receipt, then at the diamonds on her wrist, as if they were cursed. She stammered, I didn't know. I thought Kevin made that money. Anna, I'm sorry. I'm old. I let them fool me. Please be the bigger person and forgive Kevin." I smiled, a smile of complete detachment. "Keep the bracelet. Wear it or pawn it to help Kevin pay his bankruptcy lawyers. Consider it my final divorce gift, to sever whatever ties we have left. As for the advice you once gave me, it doesn't matter if a man cheats, as long as he brings home the money, I return it to you. Save that golden advice for your son's next wife, if he ever manages to crawl out of the ruins of his life." Kevin's mother stood up, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. She didn't dare look me in the eye as she quietly shuffled out of the office. The woman who was once so arrogant now looked incredibly small, isolated, and pathetic. I watched her disappear down the street, feeling totally at peace. A harsh lesson in karma had been delivered, and my life would never intersect with those toxic people again. Chicago was breezy that night. The humid heat had been washed away by a late afternoon thunderstorm, leaving the historic district cool and smelling faintly of rain and lilacs. Thomas and I sat in an old family-run diner tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The vinyl booths and the smell of homemade cherry pie and black coffee brought back childhood memories. This was the place our grandmother used to take us on weekends. Thomas slid a slice of pie toward me, his eyes full of warmth and immense pride. "Anna, the city just officially approved Integrity's master plan. Perfect score. From the zoning board. They said your vendor subsidy program and preservation layouts are the most humanitarian designs they've seen in a decade. I smiled, taking a sip of the hot diner coffee, feeling the bitter warmth settle into a sweet aftertaste just like my own life after weathering the storm. Thank you, Thomas. If you hadn't had my back, I wouldn't have had the courage to fight for myself. I've realized the greatest architecture isn't the tallest or flashiest glass tower. It's the structure that brings peace and sustains the lives of the people inside it, just like true love. It doesn't need flashy, public displays. It needs deep, genuine understanding. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a long text message from Kevin. Anna, standing in my foreclosed office today, looking at the dead orchids on the balcony, I finally understand. The person who pulled me from the mud, who stayed up all night for me, who cared for me, was you. I called myself a visionary architect, but I was completely blind. I threw away my greatest treasure for a cheap illusion. I am so sorry. I'm sorry I trampled on you. If only I had appreciated your lilacs. I stared at the message for a moment. Not a single ripple of regret touched my slant heart. His belated apologies were like dead leaves falling on a frozen lake. I didn't reply. I hit delete, flipped the phone face down, and picked up my fork to enjoy my pie with my brother. The scent of lilacs from a nearby garden drifted through the diner window, brushing against my linen sleeve. I knew from today onward I was the master of my own fate. I would sit in the seat of honor in my own life, secured by my intellect, my integrity, and my true worth. And no one would ever tell me to leave my seat again. Dear listeners, Tears Behind the Lilacs has officially come to an end. It is a complete, deeply satisfying conclusion that highlights the core values of integrity and consequence. Through Anna's turbulent but resilient journey, this story hopes to share a profound reflection on loyalty, professional ethics, and the undeniable law of karma. In a world full of flashy temptations, it is easy to be blinded by expensive, superficial orchids and forget the enduring, sweet resilience of the humble lilacs blooming by the window. Wealth, status, and vanity will eventually pop like soap bubbles. Only loyalty, a pure heart, and ethical integrity are the true foundations that help us stand firm against the storms of life. Thank you for tuning in, sharing in these emotions, and spending your time with us. We wish you peace of mind, excellent health, and a home filled with genuine, unwavering love. Goodbye, and we'll see you in our next story.